So I'd like to thank everyone for being here today for the Revolutionary Students' Union, and I'm going to be talking about Occupy Wall Street and trying to do a Marxist analysis of Occupy Wall Street. So yeah, I'll just start. Occupy Wall Street remains an incredibly complex movement, and any attempt at analysis must necessarily remain partial and incomplete. However, we can begin a rigorous analysis of the political, economical, and social aspects, and I will attempt to do so by historically situating the movement and point to some of its underlying causes. I want to stress that this comes from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. Nevertheless, I think that the core concepts, or some core concepts from Leninism, can help explain the nature of the Occupy movement, its composition, and where it is likely to go. First, Leninism has three concepts that can really help us understand the situation of Occupy Wall Street. First, we must understand imperialism. Under normal capitalism, the capitalist makes profits through productive forces. In basic, that means they use their workers and they make money off those profits. Financialism and imperialism alter the dynamics of this normal, usual relationship. They alter the relationship in three major ways. First, the banks and financial institutions gain profits through interest-bearing of loans and investments. So this is the first key component of imperialism. Instead of simply making money off the work that your workers do, whether it's a mechanic or you work at a tea shop, you make money off the loans to the owners or the cooperative or the corporation that owns it. So you're not making, in this sense, necessarily money off the actual work that's being done. You're making money off the loans that were given, 5%, 10%, of the principal amount of loans. So this is a different way of making money than the traditional capitalist dynamic, which is based on production. The second thing is banks and financial institutions gain profit through the ownership of other firms, companies, and banks, and use those firms to carry out the normal capitalist productive relationships. So ownership of other firms. Just look at, I believe it was Chase. Chase ended up buying out Wachovia, but they already had substantial investments in it. So of every dollar that Wachovia made in profits, Chase made a cut of that. Just like with Walmart. Walmart carries out the actual nitty-gritty, on-the-ground exploitation of workers and immigrants and people in the third world. But all sorts of investment firms and mutual funds own parts of Walmart that gain money for those large conglomerates and those large firms. So, and what you'll notice is this sort of investment creates a huge chain of investment that can very easily cause a crisis, which we're finding ourselves in, which I'll get to a little later. But then finally, banks and financial institutions can directly appropriate the wealth of the imperialized by seizing industries, stealing resources, and forcing labor. Let me give a good American example. Home foreclosures. There has been widespread corruption in the foreclosure process, and many different individuals across all of the states have had instances where the bank has foreclosed on a property that either, one, had no reason to be foreclosed on, they had paid all their mortgage payments, they were caught up with their loan, or two, they didn't actually own the legal title to the foreclosure. And the title was actually held by some other third party, but they foreclosed anyway. Now, these are reported cases. Because there are reported cases, there are almost certainly unreported cases where the bank has no right to take somebody's house, but they take it. They just simply seize it. And that's value, right? There's value that has been put into that home, that has produced it, and they're just taking it. Happens all the time, happens with pensions, happens with health insurance funds. Just seizing. But also it's important to note that this also happens around the world. Iraqi oil. It's not as though we simply invest in Iraq, and yes, there is some aspect to that. But there's a reason why we invaded Iraq, among other reasons, and that is to directly take their oil, to directly appropriate it, to put it under our control. Look at Libya. Look at Afghanistan. Look at the Philippines. Look at Colombia. Look at Côte d'Ivoire. Look at, you can pick anywhere in the globe where imperialists are simply smashing and grabbing. And then forced labor. One American example and one third world example. Immigrants that do not get their paychecks. In the United States, Chicanos, Mexican nationals, are an oppressed nationality. If they come from Mexico here, they do not get papers and they do not get the legal status of a citizen. So many of these immigrants are forced to work. Or not forced, I mean they're forced because they'll starve to death if they don't. But they work, and then 2 weeks rolls around, and either part of their labor is stolen, which is to say they get a paycheck that is not for the promised amount, or in many cases they're fired or deported, or they're simply not paid at all. This is just a direct appropriation of their labor. So this is not some crazy concept of slavery that's 300 years back. This is still happening now. The Democratic Republic of Congo. Literally there are army forces basically bought off by large corporations. I don't think Apple buys people off in Congo, but I believe T-Mobile does. They buy up army officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo to take over rare mineral mines, which are essential for the production of technology, electronics. And they literally enslave tribes and villages around the mines and force people to work themselves to death in those mines. And thus it turns into a cell phone. Conflict minerals, if you're interested in learning more about that. This is a direct appropriation of labor, a direct form of imperialism. So again, this is not some outmoded or outdated idea, but rather, and I will stress this, the very primary nature of the current world economy. Let me repeat that. Our current economy is fundamentally based on imperialism. That is how our economy runs. So this is the concept of imperialism. Let's move to the second concept. The second concept is super profits. Now, these capitalist super profits go above and beyond the profits made in the normal exploitation of labor. So what is a super profit? If I pay you to work in Walmart and you're an American citizen, I have to pay you a wage. That is the cost of your labor. It's at a market price. And you use that wage to buy goods and services that you need. Well, you'll notice each of these ways, financialization, I make the money off of the actual productive work done, but then I make an additional profit off the loan. Ownership of other firms, again, I make the profit off of the actual labor done, but then I make an additional profit off the profits of the firms or the banks own. Or direct appropriation. I make the money off the labor, normal labor, let's say mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or working at fast food, but then I don't have to pay you, right? If you're an immigrant and I'm a capitalist, I don't have to pay you. So I can directly appropriate your labor, which means I don't have any labor costs, right? I'm not making normal capitalist profits, I'm making super profits. Well, these super profits, they don't just sit there, but instead are thrown into expanding imperialism and the productive capitalist cycle. I cannot stress the importance of super profits to the system. So again, super profits, you exploit a bunch of people in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you sell cell phones cheaper than they should be, you can now open a lot more T-Mobile chains and a lot more malls, right? I exploit a bunch of immigrants and have them farm my farm, and then instead of paying them, I deport them. I now have a huge crop of profit, so I can buy the land next to me and expand my farm. So it's always being thrown back into the system. I gain loans from owning another company. Am I going to just sit on those loans? No, I'll take that money I got from loans and I'll throw it into buying up another company, right? A smaller, medium-sized company, diversifying my portfolio. So again, super profits form the lifeblood of the system. If the super profits do not flow, the entire system will come to a grinding halt. We also see this through the financial crisis that we're in right now and the lack of liquidity. You may have heard this on the news. At the time of the crisis, there was a lack of liquidity. Well, what is liquidity? The lack of liquidity means nothing more that money does not flow across the system. The banks are not lending to other banks and other firms so that the economy grinds to a halt. So, we have this concept of super profits, right? And it's used in all sorts of diverse ways. Well, one of the ways, and this notion of super profits brings us to our last notion, which is the notion of the labor aristocracy. Capitalists not only use these profits to continue their imperialist war, but also to maintain stability. The imperialists use super profits from exploitation to buy off sections of the working class. They do this through jobs programs in the government, keeping prices for consumer goods artificially low, or paying artificially high wages. Now this may seem odd, right? I'm guessing almost everyone here works, and I'm guessing most of you work a crap job, and life is really, really expensive, and it's always a struggle to make ends meet. And I bet you're wondering, how am I getting paid too high of wages? Good thing you should ask. The way in which we think about wages, look up any first-year sociology book, and in it you'll see a section on probably wages. And what you'll see is a white male makes $1 for $1. And then a white female makes, 79 cents? And then a black male makes 76 cents, and then a black female makes 74, and then like an immigrant or a Latino male makes like 70, and then a Latino female makes like 64, and then immigrants make like 50 cents to the dollar of the white male. And the way in which it's presented is the white male wage is the normal wage. And there's something holding back all these other groups from reaching a full normal wage of the white male, right? I mean, and this should be pretty familiar to all of you, this differentiation of wages. You can find it anywhere. But the thesis of high wages, right, a bought-off working class, it sounds the same, but conceptualize it different. Conceptualize the wage of the immigrant Latino woman as the actual level of wage for labor offered. And every single wage above that is above and beyond the price of the reproduction of labor. Taken from the third world, taken from Mexico, taken from Iraq, taken from the Philippines, so that goods and services are so low. Like look at Walmart. Where do most people, low-income people shop? They shop at Walmart because their wages correspond to Walmart prices. Those Walmart prices, every single object there depends on the exploitation, the super exploitation of workers in China, India, the Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia. So as bare minimum of an existence as that is, it is still a labor aristocratic, or tends towards a labor aristocratic existence. Well, you could say, well, it's still sucky. Yes, of course it's still sucky. Yes, they're still exploited. Yes, they're still working class. But compare the work that you do to the work of anyone in any third world country. And how labor intensive is your work compared to theirs? So there you go. Theory of labor aristocracy. We'll get into it a little bit. Again, the jobs program. It's worth noting, what is the very first thing Obama came out with to fix the economy? A jobs program. What are the Democrats demanding? A jobs program. Government spending taken in by exploiting the third world is then redistributed by giving good jobs to American citizens. Not people living in America. Not undocumented workers. American citizens. So, this final concept is our last necessary concept to begin historically situating Occupy Wall Street. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. Hang in there. Historically, Occupy Wall Street has its basis decades previously in the Soviet Union. That may seem odd. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States stood unchallenged as the foremost imperialist power. When the Soviet Union existed, it was able to fund national movements, it was able to resist the United States, and keep them out of all sorts of different places around the world. Allow economies to develop either nationally or to have an international trading bloc, like to trade with the Soviet Union and other socialist partners. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States carved up the remains of the Soviet Union, sold them off, expanded its power through the globe. The Third World had almost no support to resist the United States. The Middle East, the United States immediately began the process of imperializing Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Globalization was not a new phenomenon, but simply the integration of world imperialism under the United States, the leadership of the United States. And this brutal exploitation continued without cessation until the late 90s, and then things began to radically change. So you'll notice, probably not you out there in internet world, but there is a map of the world. And this is 1995, roughly speaking. These are the areas available to the United States. All of Canada, all of Latin America, all of Africa, all of South Asia, India, China, Russia, Western Europe. In fact, the only two areas that were actually closed, really, really closed, even Iraq. Even Iraq was open to American imperialism, or at least one of America's junior partners, like France or the UK, through the Oil for Food program. Only two places actually closed off to American imperialism: Cuba, North Korea. This is the 90s. All of this essentially belongs to the United States in this imperialist sense, right? They can imperialize every single aspect, every corner of the globe. However, things started to radically change about a decade ago. Two key components changed in the world situation. First, the U.S. ceased to be the only imperialist power on the world scale. The European Union and other countries began engaging in imperialism and investing all over the world. The scramble for new markets among these imperialists and investing countries has reduced the ability of the United States to extract super profits. This means much less ability to funnel super profits to domestic workers. And this has caused massive problems domestically, as we shall see. So, suddenly, other imperialist powers start arriving on the scene. They start beginning to control things, or, compete. UK invests, EU invests in Ireland. The EU starts investing in Libya, Tunisia, North Africa. They begin investing in Australia, New Zealand. It's still open to American imperialism, but now they have to compete with other imperials, with other forms of investment. Japan starts investing, this is sort of the lost decade. This is part of the problem, just relatedly. Japan had a really hard decade. It was literally called the lost decade. Why? The emergence of new powers. In South Asia, in Indonesia, which isn't on there, right? European powers began investing. Japan stopped being able to invest and gain super profits through financialization and ownership of firms, right? Because the Japanese don't have an army. They can't put their forces on the ground if they don't get a trade deal they like. So this brings us to our second point. The second point is the United States has met with fierce resistance to their global imperialist program. The United States has faced stiff resistance to their military imperialist program, and trillions have been spent on Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Libya. And the United States continues to suffer military defeat after defeat. In addition, military projects such as Colombia, South Korea, and the Philippines continue to falter. The United States spends billions on these collaborator governments, but reaps very few rewards from them. Think of all of the areas that we now have resistance. We have Afghanistan, we have now Iraq, which is falling out of American imperialist control. We have Iran that's falling out of American imperialist control. We have huge areas of India that are now Maoist. We have Colombian violent military resistance. You'll notice that the globe is sharply shrinking for the United States. But in addition to this, many national governments have begun building active resistance to American domination. Venezuela, Bolivia, Iran, and others have been actively building not just a local resistance, but an international resistance to global imperialism. So the foreign conditions have precipitated a massive crisis in the United States domestic situation. Suddenly now, Bolivia, parts of Peru, Brazil, Argentina, all of these are now no longer open to the United States, right? Guatemala, Ecuador. In fact, that's why there was a coup in Ecuador just a little while ago. Suddenly, Russia now pursues a national policy, right? China is still semi-open, but they have begun pursuing a national policy, right? They've begun investing in themselves and controlling their own resources. India is now looking for investments all over, from all sorts of different groups. Now there's a lot more competition. In addition, the first manifestation of this weakness showed itself in the so-called Arab Spring. We just lost, right, most of North Africa, including, I'll get to that. Historically, the United States has held down the Middle East with help from its colonist junior partners, Israel and the local comprador class. A comprador is a capitalist who sells out their country to imperialism for a cut of the profits, as opposed to a capitalist who fights for their country against imperialism, not because they care about the people of their country, but they fight against imperialism because they want to exploit their own country. Right? So those are the two kinds of capitalists: national capitalists and comprador capitalists. The military, financial, and political strain on the United States, due to their imperialist wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, has made it incredibly difficult for them to respond to the rapidly changing situation. But the blood for these so-called bloodless revolutions were paid in Iraq and Central Asia. So when you hear someone say that these are bloodless, peaceful revolutions, you should take a look at why these revolutions are possible. From the ruling class perspective, these revolutions need to be stopped. In this case, the imperialists from the United States and the imperialists from the European Union have formed an alliance to crush these uprisings and enforce their own agenda. However, the disruption to the system has continued for more than a decade of world imperialism, and American imperialism especially, and it shows no sign of stopping. This has created an incredibly dangerous situation for the ruling elite of the United States. The first wave of rebellion to the international ruling class, and this is, now we're getting into Occupy Wall Street, or a domestic history. So this is the international situation in which Occupy Wall Street finds itself. But here's the second part. This is the domestic situation. The first wave of rebellion against the international ruling class strategy, the American strategy for its international affairs, came from the Tea Party. Now, this first wave of dissent rose from a demand for a return of super profits. Notice the slogans of the Tea Party all take the form of taking the country back, or the real America, etc., etc. In addition, they continue to attack immigrants and minorities despite their ostensible libertarian attitude. How many of the Tea Party people say they're a libertarian? Well, if you really believe you shouldn't have any restrictions on people unless they're harming someone else, then how exactly do you justify restricting immigration and deporting people? Well, that's a really good question. One, it does no analysis by simply saying the Tea Party people are stupid or backward or they don't understand what libertarianism is. That doesn't explain anything. The reality rests on class analysis. The Tea Party demands its bribe from the imperialists and will continue to remain in a state of discontent until it receives it. One possible bribe, the seizure of all immigrant property. Every immigrant restaurant, taco stand, house, car, plane, factory, retail store. If they are deported, where does their property go? It goes either to the government or it's sold off as an auction at bottom bargain prices. Who gets that? Primarily the white middle class, the labor aristocratic white Tea Party members. So it's not stupid. They know, well, they may not know what they're doing, but as Marx said famously of ideology, they do it, but they don't know that they do it. So, furthermore, about the Tea Party, they remain more than willing to carry out the dirty work of their corporate capitalists by attacking regulation, government programs to the poor, and oppressed nationalities. They're willing to do this. However, they still demand their cut. And that's the class characteristics of the Tea Party movement. Occupy Wall Street, however, shares a similar position, and this may sound very uncomfortable to people who are supportive of it. This second wave of rebellion to the American foreign ruling class strategy shares several important features with the Tea Party. The vast majority of the protesting primarily focuses on financial institutions and fails to question the deeper system itself. Some, the most advanced, question capitalism. But very few go so far as to question imperialism itself. So, these people who fail to question anything deeper and basically just question the financial system, they also form the core liberal element that will attempt to move this protest back into the Democratic Party. This attempt at reformism, right, of fixing the financial system and getting the banks under control, remains doomed to failure, of course, but continues to remain the majority element of the Occupy Wall Street movement. This reformist and liberal leadership has taken control throughout the United States in many key respects, including using things like Infrastructure Day or some other regulation proposals, right? Reinstate Glass-Steagall, don't allow predatory lending, blah, 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 etc., etc. But they're not the only element. There is also the petit bourgeois radical element, and which is the next section of Occupy Wall Street. These radicals believe that there is something wrong with the system. Really quick, petit bourgeois is a term which basically means small-time capitalists. Bourgeois are the capitalists, petit bourgeois are the small-time capitalists. So this is an ideology for shopkeepers, right? For individual carpenters, for plumbers who own their own tools. This is a notion of being an individual, self-owned person who doesn't have a boss, or, you know, if you do have a boss, it's a personal relationship and there's just a couple of you. So these radicals believe that there is something wrong with the system, but they do not see or understand the structure of capitalism, imperialism, and this is what's essential, their own super profits gained through national oppression. For this section of Occupy Wall Street, it supports vague notions of revolution, of getting rid of the system. However, they refuse to take any concrete actions to support changing the system or have any concrete analysis of the class situation. Let me give you a concrete example of this from Occupy Wall Street. The Demands Working Group is this very good example, and the Demands Working Group was a relatively large working group that included at least dozens of people in Occupy Wall Street. So I don't know if any of you have heard of this. This working group basically sought to come up with demands for Occupy Wall Street and bring those demands to general consensus at the General Assembly. However, the facilitators from the General Assembly continued to block actions in the demands working groups using procedure and ultimately got the working group unilaterally removed from the Occupy Wall Street website without bringing it to GA. And basically said that group, the demands working group, should be folded into the visions and directions for Occupy Wall Street. The arguments used remain common ones, the people attacking the demands working group. That giving demands shows that the state and corporations have the power, that demands make it easier for the Democrats to co-opt the movement, that real demand is that the very Occupy movement itself, which has created a radical space for community, blah, 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 etc., etc. And while these points may contain elements of truth, they miss the wider picture. The movement that created modern unions in the United States did not rest on a movement for movement's sake, nor did it rest on some vague notions of workers' rights coalition or something of that nature. It organized around a demand for the 8-hour workday. And this actually came from the International Workingmen's Association, from Marx, Engels, Bakunin, anarchists, etc. This demand did not rest on some radical insight or cooperative plan, but rather a simple and clear and possible demand. May Day, for those of you who don't know, is one of the most radical holidays of workers' rights, and it rested on the Haymarket massacres, which were in Chicago. These massacres and the subsequent riots rested on one simple demand, the 8-hour workday. Yet these petit bourgeois radicals refused to recognize either the history of revolutionary organizing, which depends on very specific, clear demands that the working class can take up as its own. The final section of Occupy Wall Street consists of the working class. They recognize that something remains profoundly wrong with our system. They've received an education in police brutality, and that's something. However, they remain profoundly frustrated with the leadership of the movement that does not seem to have a clear plan, program, or even consistent methods. They continue to grow more and more frustrated by the day with the entire system, and this leaves the working class 3 options. First is they lead themselves back to right-wing integration in the capitalist system. They can openly become fascist or simply beg for more scraps from the Democrats. And so basically a return to a demand for super profits. If this happens, Occupy Wall Street will simply become the Democratic Party's Tea Party. Secondly, they can follow the petty bourgeois radicals and continue with their ineffective strategies and organizations. If this is the case, we'll see another radicalizing event like the 1960s, which is a positive thing. The Occupy Wall Street movement will provide fertile ground for experimentation and radicalism, which may shift this country more strongly in a left-leaning direction. But if the question of super profits is not addressed, it will ultimately depend on the international situation, right? Because if super profits aren't questioned, then the rest of the world might force us into the position where we have to actually give up super profits. Well, what would this international situation look like? If the United States can reestablish itself as a global imperialist position, we'll see an explosion of social democratic welfare capitalism. You'll notice the radicalism of the 60s led to all sorts of widespread reform in the system. Social democratic benefits, increased Social Security, increased unemployment, jobs training programs, inner city youth, basketball, whatever. I mean, it's worth noting that Richard Nixon, one of the big things that he was pushing on, this is Richard Nixon, right, right-wing president, is he was going to get a universal one-payer social health care system, right? So that sort of radicalizing upsurge in the 60s led to a left lean for the entire country, and that would be a positive thing. But of course that rested on the United States finding its foothold and reestablishing its imperialist agenda. So that's clearly suboptimal. However, If the United States cannot reestablish its global imperialist position, we'll see a massive explosion of imperialism on a worldwide scale, and almost certainly warfare on a worldwide scale. We can already see, you know, things. We can see the signs of things to come. Russia has begun equipping Syria with, anti-shipping missiles, so that if they are attacked, that they can make sure that they sink the entire Mediterranean fleet. China, whether they'll do it or not, has promised to defend Iran militarily if the United States invades it. Now, will they put troops on the ground? Probably not. They don't have the capacity for it. But if there are Chinese fighters all over Iranian airspace, it's going to make any American ground war, or any American war, a lot more costly. One thing to think about is 1913. The world was carved up among imperialist powers. They were fighting over super profits in the colonies, in Africa, and Latin America, and Asia. And what did it lead to? World War. Not because any individual actor wanted it, but because they had class pressure, right? Social pressure, forcing them through, because of imperialism, into inevitable conflict. So, that's what we can, if U.S. doesn't reestablish itself, that's where we're headed. And it's a semi-controversial claim, but I think there's a strong case to be made for it. So where does this leave us with the Occupy Wall Street movement? Well, we should recognize, and I mean this in a positive sense, we should recognize the limits of the Occupy Wall Street movement. We should understand what it is. We should understand that this is not the revolution. This is not going to lead to the overthrow of capitalism. But we should continue to support it. A really good analog, at least I believe so, that I like to use, is the Students for a Democratic Society in the 1960s. In the early 60s, the SDS was a liberal reformist organization at best. What do we want? We want a democratic society. Well, what does that mean? Well, they didn't know. No, they just knew that they wanted democracy. But through that period of struggle, what do you have out of it? Radical Maoists supporting the Black Panthers, massive national liberation struggles, the Weather Underground, right? All sorts of revolutionary, however imperfect, organizations came out of this liberal reformist position. So, even if we are frustrated with Occupy Wall Street, even if we are like, this is not going towards revolution, this is not going to, get us where we want to be, it's very important to keep in mind where Students for Democratic Society started as an organization, and not be too judgmental to begin with. The way forward is certainly not clear, but we must try and move people towards revolutionary working class positions in Occupy Wall Street. This does not mean simply showing up and shouting our slogans at them. Nor does it mean showing up and just handing out our literature. It means taking an active role in the discussion, directions, actions, and plans presented. We must work tirelessly to create this revolutionary consciousness in whatever fashion we can, and we must work to find good slogans that the working class can take up as their own. Now, Kai, if you'd be so kind as to move us over here. These are 3 preliminary tasks that I believe we should definitely be working on, given the analysis I just gave, if my analysis is correct. The number one thing is to stop imperialism. This entire system is based on imperialism. The United States can continue to buy off elements of its working class because of imperialism. As revolutionaries, our primary goal must be to stop imperialism. And not only that, to stop American imperialism. If the EU becomes radically imperialistic and has a break with the United States and becomes something separate, it is the EU revolutionaries' job to stop EU imperialism. But it is not our job to complain about EU imperialism and fight against EU imperialism. By doing that, under the guise of fighting imperialism, We do nothing more than become lackeys for the American imperialist state. Well, you don't want the EU to win. You don't want Russia to win. You don't want China to win, right? I mean, we're certainly better than all of those. Our answer should be no. No, you are not. And I want you to lose. And this was the situation that Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg was confronted in 1914. We are fast approaching 1914, where we will see a big difference between the real revolutionaries and the social fascists, which I'll get into in a little bit. But when inter-imperialists go to war, it is the job of the revolutionaries not to engage in revolutionary defensives. Well, we want a revolution, but we've got to defend our country. It is our job to turn the imperialist war into a revolutionary civil war. Perhaps theoretically speaking, it could be a peaceful war, if anyone is watching from any government organizations. Like a general strike. That's all I'm talking about. General strike or something like that. Certainly not open violent warfare. I'm not into that. But that's our first task. And to whatever extent we can stop imperialism, we weaken the system. To whatever extent American bases are removed from Latin America, from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, the harder it is for them both to dominate oppressed nations, our working class brothers and sisters across the world, and the harder it is for them to buy off American workers. The second most pressing task every revolutionary in the United States has is to ensure that proletarianization becomes revolutionary. This is a thesis I have. It will be demonstrated by time, either true or false. America's done. It will never reestablish its position as the global hegemony ever again. You will never see 1960s America, ever. This bad economy, this is how we're going to be living for the rest of our lives. It is not going to get better. There is not going to be an upsurge. Our wages will not increase. Our social programs will not increase. And we will continue to live a further and further marginalized existence. The working class will receive less and less super profits because the United States will not be able to pay them. The United States imperialists will not be able to pay them. So, what then is our task? People are going to, and already are, transitioning from a labor aristocracy, where they live better than everyone else in the world, into a real working class situation where you can expect to bust your ass for 12 hours a day and not have enough to feed, clothe, and put a roof over your head, which is the way most people have been living. To start living in condemned houses and makeshift shacks. To have to walk everywhere. To not have access to water, clean water, edible food, healthy food. That is where we are headed. So, as these former labor aristocrats become proletarians, real proletarians, working class people, are not just working class, but proletarian, the most exploited of people, where suddenly white kids from California live the same sort of life as immigrants from Chihuahua. That's what we're talking about here. We need to make sure they become revolutionary. Because if they do not become revolutionary, if they do not understand the nature of imperialism, if they do not understand labor aristocratic super profits, then they'll think, oh, somebody took this from me. And who will it be who took it? The same people who always take things from them in America. It'll be the Mexicans, and it'll be the blacks, and it'll be the Asians. And the gays, and the feminists, and the communists, and the socialists. If this is a matter of survival, if we do not make them revolutionary, they will become fascists. And I will see all of you in the concentration camps. So, pressing task. The next thing to do is combat social fascism. What is social fascism? It is socialist in character, and it is fascist in reality. The sort of leftists who bemoan the shrinking of the white middle class. The leftists who support the invasion of Afghanistan because the Taliban are so bad, and support the invasion of Iraq and Libya because they were all so bad guys and were bombing people, and who say, you know, we have to look at China, China's human rights. You know, Chinese police, they attack brutally protesters. Not here in the United States, where protesters are never arbitrarily beaten or detained or pepper sprayed or tear gassed. Social fascism, it is a cover, a very thin cover at that, for supporting nationalism and fascism, white nationalism, white supremacy. If someone is complaining about how terrible this or that Arab leader is, or this or that African leader is, and plenty of them are, say, well, what about Israel? Shouldn't you always be complaining about Israel and it as an American puppet before anything? Before you complain about Chinese exploiting their workers, shouldn't you be complaining about American companies exploiting Indonesian workers? Or hell, even exploiting immigrant workers within here? If some quote-unquote leftist tells you that we need to support the troops, say, also, this is the best response. I support the troops when they take their uniform off and cease being tools for imperialism and start being part of the working class. Those sorts of strategies, we saw where that led us in Germany. There was a huge quote-unquote left base of German workers who were receiving super profits from the German Empire, and then they got taken away, and let me tell you, they did not go in a revolutionary direction. So, these, I believe, are our three most pressing tasks when we are part of Occupy Wall Street and talking to people about Occupy Wall Street and getting involved in Occupy Wall Street and creating organizations out of people we meet in Occupy Wall Street to do concrete work. And no, I don't mean affinity groups, and no, I don't mean working groups. I mean real mass organizations on immigration, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, housing rights, tenant rights, real mass organizations. These are the central tasks we need to keep in mind. And that is my both analysis and prescription for Occupy Wall Street. So. I can take questions.